Hello and welcome to Palace Confidential, your weekly look at all things royal, brought to you from the Mail's HQ in Kensington. I'm Jo Elvin, and we've got another top panel this week. The Daily Mail's royal editor Rebecca English, the Mail on Sunday's editor-at-large Charlotte Griffiths, and the thorn between two roses is, of course, the Mail's diary editor Richard Eden. Welcome to you all. I like having a threesome in the studio. That's great. Let's start with some breaking news concerning the BBC and a former royal nanny. What can you tell us, Rebecca, about that?
Well, at 9:30 this morning, the BBC had to stand up at the High Court in London, and there was a full mea culpa. They're going to have to pay substantial damages to the former nanny, Alexandra Pettifer, better known as Tiggy Legge-Bourke, over the Bashir interview, in which they've admitted that Bashir spread some pretty scurrilous rumours about her, all not true, and used those as part of his effort to wind Diana up to give him the interview. And the BBC have stood up and admitted this and have agreed to pay her substantial damages.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, Richard, just another reminder of how really genuinely dark those times were.
I mean, the BBC prides itself on being our national broadcaster. You know, it's really meant to have standards higher than anyone else, and it's always very quick to criticise newspapers or anyone else falling from these high standards. And this was a really low point in its history, I would say. You know, they took advantage of a very vulnerable woman in Princess Diana and really worked on all her preoccupations and fears, and in order to get this exclusive interview, and it was an amazing interview. But was it right to get it in that way? I think, my goodness, you know, if any of us used those sort of techniques, we would have been sacked many years ago. It's a really tawdry whole spectacle.
Oh, it's hideous. But I want to move quickly to now the fascinating new book everyone's talking about this week from Tom Bower, called Revenge, Meghan, Harry and the War Between the Windsors. Now, Rebecca, there's a lot of eye-opening claims in the book, and one of them was that the Queen was relieved that Meghan was not at the funeral of her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh. Now, I suppose that's not the most surprising emotion, but it's quite startling to see it there in black and white, sort of a quote, as it were. Yeah,
I mean, it's difficult to say too much about it because we don't know who Bower's sources are for it. He quotes senior royal aides, and people I've been speaking to at Buckingham Palace have said, well, you know, would the Queen really have said something like that on the day of her late husband's funeral? You know, she's burying the man she loved for 73 years.
Also, who would she have said that to? It wouldn't have been announced in a way that's like...
Well, exactly. Yeah. He says, well, you know, they've made the point to me, look, they would have only been, because it was the height of lockdown, 3 or 4 people there at the time. So would she have said it? And if so, would it have been said to people that would leak that information? That said, in fairness to Bower and the book, I'd heard similar sentiments about a year ago, I have to say. Not in an aggressive way towards Meghan, but more in a way that, you know, she was glad that the kind of fuss around on the day of her husband's funeral around it was just a bit more minimal. I mean, forget, that was only weeks after the Oprah interview. It was a very raw time for them. So, you know, I do think there's some truth in it. It's just how much truth it was that she said it on the day of her husband's funeral.
It's fascinating. And Richard, the picture of Harry painted in the book is, shock horror, of often a very angry young man.
It is, but it's a picture that I have to say we've become familiar with, really. I mean, you know, every time we see him, you know, like this week, there have been lots of images. I appreciate he doesn't like photographers, so maybe he sort of doesn't smile for the cameras, but he does often look unhappy. And, you know, when you contrast that, just sort of, you know, Google pictures of Harry when he was with William and Catherine back in the day.
Well, we used to know him as the party prince, didn't we?
Yeah, but he was always the one who was laughing and joking and smiling. And it has really been a transformation since he got married, and I think that I only received my copy of Bower's book today, and I've been busy devouring it for details. But that's a picture which certainly he seems to be painting. Yes.
Yeah, Charlotte, it's interesting, isn't it? This won't bring the smile back to his face anytime soon. This book, I would have thought. How do you think this book will be received in Montecito?
I think somewhere in Montecito there's a little voodoo doll with pins all over it.
Of
It's
Tom
probably quite
Bower?
a big one because Tom Bower is about 6 foot tall. But I mean, they will be going apoplectic about this book, and they'll probably say, "Oh, it's just noise" in public. But you know, they will be reading every single word. They've probably finished it by now. They've probably asked Sunshine Sachs to get someone to read it as well and to go through and see where they can, you know, get their lawyers out. I would have thought.
There are a lot of details which I think, you know, in the newspapers we wouldn't publish, frankly.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things. He may face legal action over them. There's lots of claims about Meghan's mother as well, which are fascinating to read, but I'm not going to repeat them here, I think.
Yeah, they're subjects that are just don't go there for most people. I mean, Tom Bower's very brave.
So what do you think, Rebecca? Do you think we might see some of Harry and Meghan's reaction actually played out in their Netflix docuseries? Will they be filmed maybe discussing the book?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because the New York Post is page 6 this week, which seems to be fairly well plumbed into certainly the showbiz side of their life in the US. Have been saying this week that Netflix are putting pressure on them to come out with this docuseries by the end of the year to tie in with Harry's memoirs, which are due to be published before the year's out. So they obviously want their pound of flesh and, you know, will want to kind of film as much up to the minute footage as they can. I just feel kind of sorry for the Queen in all of this, to be honest. You know, the thought of, even with the Bower book, more of this being revisited, the thought of the docuseries later on this year, Harry's memoirs. I mean, she's 96 years old, she's on her own now, she's lost her husband. Her health is not what it was. I mean, I don't want to put the frightens on anyone, but we have seen it decline a lot in the last 6 to 8 months. I just think all of this is the last thing she needs, quite frankly.
Gosh, awful for the Queen, but a fascinating time for royal watchers, isn't it? With, you know, docuseries, potential podcasts, books, Harry's memoirs. It's like, we're going to have to do this show every day.
We really are when it comes to the autumn. I mean, what I found most disturbing about this report in the New York Post was that, you know, Netflix apparently is planning to coincide the docuseries with the next series of The Crown. Well, they did that last time very cynically. What they did was they broadcast The Crown at the same time as Diana in Her Own Words, which was really powerful programme because it was recordings that Diana had made, never dreaming they'd ever be made public, but they were, and they kind of had her voice very spookily over images of her at the time. And Netflix promoted the two at the same time as The Crown. They used this version of her marriage breakdown as the basis for The Crown script. And, you know, people who watched it, like my daughter's generation, were just horrified. They were like, "Oh, Prince Charles is a dreadful man, isn't he?" And it really did damage. You know, royal, courtiers and friends of Prince Charles talked about how much damage it was doing to the monarchy. And we're going to see that again. We're going to have the image of the sort of rival royals with Harry and Meghan in their docuseries at the same time as negative portrayals of the royal family in The Crown.
Well, quite. I mean, and, you know, with Netflix's business fortunes quite precarious at the moment, they'll milk whatever they can to up the ante on both of those, I'm sure. But we'll move on right now from the book, because we have a special episode of Palace coming up next week, which is an interview with Tom Bower all about the book. So check back next Thursday for that. Sticking with the Sussexes now, however, and Harry heading to the UN this week to deliver a speech on Nelson Mandela Day. Before I get the views of the panel, let's watch a quick clip.
On my wall and in my heart every day is an image of my mother and Mandela meeting in Cape Town in 1997. The photo was presented to me by the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu, whose friendship and inspiration were their own treasured gift. My wife and I had the honor of introducing our 4-month-old son to him back in 2019. But when I first looked at the photo, straight away what jumped out was the joy on my mother's face, the playfulness, cheekiness even, the pure delight to be in communion with another soul so committed to serving humanity.
Rebecca, coming to you first. Now, Harry seemed to be going a lot further there than he would have were he an official, dutiful member of the royal family.
100%, and he's clearly relishing doing it. The only thing is, I felt that speech was a bit all over the place. You know, there was a bit of kind of social justice, a bit of the climate change, another dig at the media, and I think that's a focus that he's lost by not having that kind of machinery around him, which you have as part of the royal household.
Yes, he's angry about a lot of things. Which do you think he's the most angry about?
the media. I think we can safely say, and I think that will feature very heavily in his memoirs later on this year. I wouldn't take a bet off any of you lot, I don't think, on that.
Richard, what did you make of the speech?
It just seemed, I mean, I watched the whole thing so that our viewers of Past Confidential don't have to, you know, but my goodness.
You martyr. Yeah.
It was badly written, like Rebecca says. I think, you know, he misses that team. Oh, goodness
That's a really
knows.
good question.
It's possible his wife may have had a hand in it. But it was, come on, let's think about what it was. It was to mark Nelson Mandela Day, you know, celebrating the memory of a great man. But what did it have to do with Mandela? It was just, apart from the references to how Mandela had met Diana and that sort of thing, that was sort of pegged on at the end. It all seemed to be just his regular pet causes, you know, everything from COVID to, the media, really. It was just a mess, and not clear why he was chosen or why he was giving this speech.
I wish it was a little bit more inspiring. It feels like that's a platform to be motivating, not just to tell us how terrible everything is. Is that fair?
Hope. There's a word called hope. They're always proclaiming they know all about hope, but they never actually say anything hopeful, I don't think, these days.
No, if there's one thing, you know, Nelson Mandela, is known for in his memory, was all about rising above your terrible situation and giving hope and giving inspiration, and that didn't come across from this speech.
I think that's so spot on as well, because I think what I think this boils down to is Harry was always reined back when he was in the royal family, and now he feels like he's got the chance to settle scores. He wasn't allowed to do it, but I think you've got to pick your moments to do it, in which to do that, and he's not. He just wants to fire off all the time, and actually he just needs to be a little bit more circumspect, I think, in how he does it.
Do you think, Charlotte, there's any fairness in this idea that maybe he sees an attachment to the UN? It's another big establishment that isn't the royal family. Does it give him a sense of security to be in that fold?
Yeah, I think both of them tend to affiliate themselves with organisations. First it was the Obamas for a while, then it was Oprah. I've heard that he's formed a friendship with the Annenberg family over in America, which are an important American family, and now it's the UN. I do get the impression that they kind of do want to attach themselves to people that might give them that security, a platform with which to do their speeches, and I think that's one of their tactics.
It's interesting. Let's move on for now. And Harry, I don't know if you know, he has a brother called William who was also speaking on camera this week. Let's see a clip of that.
In 2022, we're back and bringing Earthshot to the USA, where we'll award the next 5 Wings prize.
And we will be doing it right here in Boston.
So, Rebecca, what can you tell us about William's speech?
Well, it wasn't a speech, it was a very brief video announcement, but it's that he's taking his Earthshot award to the US this year, which we knew was going to happen, but they've announced where, and they're going to Boston in December. I'm told that Kate will go with him, and they may even kind of put in another few engagements while they're out there. And I think what's interesting about Earthshot is the contrast with what we heard from Harry this week, a lot of doom and gloom, whereas William's going down a different path and saying, look, we know we're in a time of crisis, particularly for the environment, but let's focus on the positives, what we can do to positively change that. Let's put our money where our mouth is and encourage people to come up with things that will get us out of the mess we've got ourselves into. So it's quite interesting, I think, the juxtaposition between the two brothers on this.
Now, you mentioned he might put in another couple of engagements while he's in America. Richard, do you think that might include a little stop off in Montecito to see the family?
Look, William and Harry were in the same cathedral at St Paul's in London, and they were kept apart for the whole time. They didn't meet up once while Harry and Meghan were in London. So the idea that when he's in the same vast country, that they might sort of pop over for tea, I think really is for the birds. It's not going to happen.
They've gone from the opposite coasts. I think that's quite telling, isn't it?
Is that far enough apart?
Well, you think they deliberately chose Boston because of its distance?
Yeah, well, imagine if he'd chosen California. We would have had a field day.
Do you think, though, that it hints at any competitiveness between them?
I think so. I think William's always going to win hands down. He's the future king. He's also Diana's son, which Harry seems to think he has a monopoly on. But I did think that William was a little bit cringe trying to do the Harry act. He sort of pointed at the camera. So there is a competitiveness. I don't know if William's yet pulling it off. And who can forget the last Earthshot prize? He wore this sort of trendy high neck shirt. So I think he needs to work on his cool dad routine. But there's definitely competitiveness there. Of course there is.
On that note, do you think there's any danger that he won't command the same kind of audience in America, and that it's inevitable that there will be those comparisons about who can get the most attention for what they're doing?
Well, the Earthshot's a big deal. You know, it's a big prize with big money and big aims. You know, they're trying to find ways of doing something positive to try and stop climate change and try and make a difference. And there's big money behind it. So I think it will always have a big impact, and there's very important figures, you know, Queen Rania of Jordan, I think, is involved, isn't she? And, you know, like pop superstar Shakira, people like that. They, you know, so people want to be associated with it anyway. So I don't think there's any problem in terms of needing to compete with Harry, frankly.
The Americans go mad for royals, and these are two real-life royals. He's the next in line.
He's going to be the king.
Yeah, exactly. I think they're going to lap him up.
I think what's intriguing as well, and I don't know the answer to this in all honesty, is how what Harry and Meghan doing is landing with most of America. You can tell in California and probably in New York as well, with the kind of demographic there, it lands well with them. But America's a big country. You know, how does it land with Midtown America?
I think that's a really good point. And actually, we do have a lot of viewers of Palace Confidential in America. So if you do have any views on all of what we're talking about, please do comment online, and we'd love to hear from you, just to say. But I just want to talk a bit quickly, Rebecca, about Prince Charles, who was also quite forthright in his views this week on the environment.
Well, yeah, I mean, you say we've got a lot of viewers in America, and they're probably thinking 40 degrees.
We don't have aircon.
We don't have, yeah, but we live in tiny terraced houses that are not built for this kind of temperature, and we're not built for it in this country either.
And I'm Australian, and I feel like I've been through something terrible this week. But
So we've had two whole days of record-breaking temperatures in the US, and Prince of Wales was actually out and about in Cornwall. Scenes of him, brilliant scenes actually. Camilla had a parasol, you know, and was sheltering and from the heat, but of course he resolutely had his tie and his jacket and his brogues on, and he wasn't taking that off for anyone. But he did make the point.
Does the no sweating run in the family? Is that what it is?
Well, he definitely didn't seem to perspire as well. So he made the point of just saying, look, we are seeing record temperatures, and there is a correlation between this and what I've been banging on about for the last 50 odd years. You know, he was a man who was, you know, demonised by the media, I have to say, and, you know, a figure of fun talking to plants, but actually was making a very serious point on climate change and plastics, you know, half a century ago, and is seen as quite prophetic now. And, you know, who can blame him for getting a word in there and saying, this is what I've been talking about.
Thank God the plants can't talk back. That is all we have time for today. But before we go, we want to wish Prince George a very happy 9th birthday. 9. Do check tomorrow's Daily Mail for a special new portrait that has been released to mark the occasion. And my thanks to Rebecca English, Charlotte Griffiths, Richard Eden, and to you for watching. See you next week.